Welcome to 7th grade science. All of the 7th grade science classes are to listen to this lesson. Remember that all 4 of the teachers will be taking turns presenting lessons, and this is our first one. We're going to learn the steps in scientific method. You will be required to know these steps and to be able to spell them accurately. So make notes at home and pay attention to how we're going to do it. The first thing a scientist does is they have a question about something. They look at the world and they think, why is that the way it is? For instance, they might look at a pine tree and see that the pine cones are clustered mostly at the top of the tree. And they might ask, why? Why are the pine tree cones clustered at the top of the tree? That's their question. Then they would have to come up with an answer to that question. And that answer is called their hypothesis. It's just a guess based on what they already know about trees. So for instance, their guess might be, well, maybe the pine cones are located at the top of the tree because that's where the sunlight is the greatest. That might be their hypothesis. Right? The second step in this process would be their research. They would do research on pine trees to find out what other scientists have already discovered. So if scientists have already discovered the reason why pine tree cones are at the top of the tree, then there's really no need for them to go any further in the process. The third step would be to design an experiment. The experiment has to be directly related to their hypothesis, and that's a way to test their hypothesis. For instance, if our hypothesis is that there's more sunlight there, then we would have to verify first that there is more sunlight there and eliminate other possibilities. So it wouldn't want to be the amount of wind that gets up there or the amount of animals or whatever that can reach the top of the tree for the pine cones. So your experiment has to be directly related to your hypothesis. Then they would run the experiment and they would have to observe. They'd have to go back and look at their results and record their data. Okay, that's an A. Okay, then they would take all that data, and if they're looking at many, many trees, which would be required for such an experiment, they would have a lot of data, and that data has to be organized. The way we would do that is creating a graph, and the purpose of that graph is to analyze our data. We will be working with graphing and how to select the appropriate graph for the type of data that you have and what you want to find out from that. So we would analyze that data. And then finally, we would have our conclusion. If the conclusion does support our original hypothesis, then we can do more experiments on the same idea. If our conclusion does not support our original hypothesis, we need to revise or change our hypothesis. So if our experiment supports the idea that there are more pine cones at the top of the tree because there's more sunlight there, then we can continue with that idea. We have not proven anything. It's almost impossible to prove things in science. What you want to do is to eliminate what other ideas you might have. If this hypothesis is not supported, then we have to change it. So actually the real reason that pine cones are located at the top of the tree is that pine cones are, or pine trees are pollinated by the wind, and there is more wind at the top of the tree. And there are actually 2 different kinds of pine cones. The female pine cones are the big ones that produce the seeds, and the male pine cones are the small ones that produce pollen. The male pine cones will be located all over the tree, and the female pine cones, the large ones, will be at the top. You good?
Good.